On the Arctic ice sheet at minus 40 degrees, our 10,000-ton icebreaker was charging forward at full power. Suddenly, the sonar operator shouted that something was ahead. Before the captain could order a course change, the smooth, pristine ice surface ahead erupted in a dense rash of bumps, like human skin. Then, a bizarre, immense resistance violently slammed the entire ship to a halt. The ship struck as if hitting a giant block of rubber. I leaned out the porthole and saw the ice beneath the bow peeling open. Large sheets of ice curled outward like lips, revealing a dark brown substance underneath, covered in fist-sized blisters packed tightly together, each one twitching rhythmically. The ship lurched hard to the right, and I slammed into the edge of the navigation console, my ribs aching. People around me were shouting. I heard someone smashing something, another grabbing the edge of a folding table to steady themselves. My waist hit the corner of the console, and I cried out in pain, but no one answered. The overhead light flickered twice, hummed, then came back on. Everything unsecured on the table slid off, coffee cups, a clipboard, a pen, clattering into a pile against the wall. A glass shattered. Those blisters started spewing something. Amber-colored, sticky like thick syrup, it sprayed onto the bow deck, steaming on contact with the steel plates. White clouds burst in front of the searchlight, and I began to smell it, a sweet, putrid stench of rotting meat that hit my brain like a punch reminiscent of summer trash can drippings. The steam on the deck grew thicker, and something moved inside the fog. A soldier ran across the deck, his boots slipping on the steel. He hit his knees first, then fell flat. When he got up, he slipped twice more. Then I heard a sound from beneath the ice. Click, 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 like someone snapping bones one by one. Outside the window, the ice field began to wrinkle. The entire white surface, from the bow outward, developed folds, the ice rippling like living skin, covered in a dense layer of goosebumps. 20 meters away from the crack in the ice ridge, teeth began to extrude. 3 rows of arm-length fangs interlocked in a circle, slowly opening, segment by segment. 12 hours earlier, we were still in the Bering Strait. A grayish-white shape flashed on the sonar screen, lying directly across our course. The captain ordered a slowdown. I deployed the water sampler as per procedure. When the cable was retrieved, the wire was taut, emitting a piercing, teeth-grinding screech. The sensor came up coated in a transparent crystalline layer that dried rapidly in the cold wind, flaking off into hard shell-like fragments under the deck lights. The oceanographer picked up a piece with tweezers. The moment the tip pierced the membrane, a few drops of pale yellow water seeped out, landing on the metal tray and solidifying into a wax-like substance within seconds. She said it might be whale placenta, but after a few seconds peering into the microscope, her face changed. She looked up at me, her voice low, saying something beneath the ice was actively generating heat. At 3 a.m., I was on watch. The searchlight swept across the starboard ice, illuminating a row of holes. Each hole was about the same size and spacing, stretching from the ship's side into the dark distance. I crouched to look at the nearest one. Its rim was lined with amber ice crystals. I called the bridge, but the microphone only returned static, crackling, with no response. The temperature was still dropping, and frost had formed on the deck, but when I reached out to touch it, the frost was warm. After dawn, the captain ordered the icebreaker forward. The sonar officer stared at the screen with a look of terror. He said there were liquid cavities beneath the ice. The sonar operator screamed like he'd seen a ghost, shouting that the water temperature was spiking abnormally. I fastened my mask and joined the first reconnaissance team on the main deck. The ship began to accelerate, vibrations rising from the deck, but something was off. Normally, breaking ice is a crisp, cracking sound. This time, it was muffled as if the bow was pushing something that pushed back, soft yet resilient. I leaned over the railing and saw dark, sticky stuff oozing from the edges of the ice cut by the bow. Despite the cold, it didn't freeze, flowing down the hull in steaming streaks. A nearby crew member poked it with a probe. The tip sank half an inch, and when he pulled out, it stretched into a thread. The amber strand hung in the air for a few seconds before snapping. the broken end slowly turning dark brown. Then the smell hit. No one spoke on the deck. The probe slipped from the crew member's hand, bounced once on the ice. When I looked up again, he was staring toward the bow, his face pale. I followed his gaze. In the distance, the color of the ice ridge was off, with a dark layer showing through. The captain shouted something over the intercom, but the wind shredded his words. I only caught half of it. The ship continued to push forward. The smell grew heavier. As the searchlight swept over the ice ridge, the beam revealed the cross-section of the ice layer churning outward. On the third impact, the entire sheet of ice collapsed. The bow plunged sharply, tilting the hull forward by at least 20 degrees. Alarms in the bridge began to shriek, a piercing, overlapping beep that exploded in the ears. The cabinet door behind me burst open, sending a stack of folders flying out. They tumbled through the air for a few rotations before slamming to the floor. Then the starboard side began to bulge upward. A mound swelled from the sea surface, growing larger and larger. The ice layer beneath was forced apart, with shattered ice sliding to either side, revealing a massive, grayish-white mass roughly the size of a school bus. Its surface was covered in wrinkled, rigid plates, layered one over another. Between the plates, spherical objects were densely packed, each oozing an amber-colored fluid. Where the fluid sprayed onto the ship's steel plates, it began to smoke, acrid white fumes that sizzled and hissed, blistering the paint before it flaked off in blackened debris. The deck commander's voice crackled over the comm, shouting to open fire. I raised my rifle, aiming at a row of spherical organs on the creature's surface, and fired a 3-round burst. The sound of the bullets striking was strange, like puncturing a thick, tough membrane, a muffled thump-thump-thump. The edges of the grayish-white plates around the bullet holes peeled outward, oozing a thick, yellowish substance resembling mayonnaise. My teammates opened fire as well. The machine gunner, positioned about 5 steps to my left, braced his bipod on the ship's railing and unleashed a burst. Spent casings clattered across the deck, scattering and rolling everywhere. Bullets struck a cluster of spherical organs on the far left of the mass, obliterating the entire row. Splattered mucus sprayed across his face. He cursed, wiping it with his arm. His sleeve turned a deep brown, and when he touched it, the fabric crumbled away. But new growth began to emerge from the bullet holes. Within seconds of being pierced, the flesh around the edges of the wounds began to curl outward, swelling into new spheres, larger than before, their surfaces still scarred by the bullet holes. I reloaded a fresh magazine, hearing the machine gunner roar. His bullet holes were also swelling with new tissue, faster than we could fire. I loaded a clip of armor-piercing rounds, aiming at the nearest and largest spherical organ, and fired. The bullet tore through, dragging out a grayish-red strand of tissue that whipped through the air before snapping. The entire sphere exploded violently, splattering mucus everywhere. The remnants writhed frantically like dehydrated worms, and the entire structure abruptly contracted inward. After contracting, it extruded a spike. The spike was about 1 meter long, pointed and chalk white, shooting directly from the center of the shriveled sac. I heard the whistle of something cutting swiftly through the air. The spike grazed my right shoulder, slicing clean through my uniform fabric and leaving a burning sensation on the skin beneath. It then embedded itself into the steel bulkhead behind me, penetrating at least 10 centimeters deep, where it remained lodged, the exposed half still quivering. I stared at the trembling spike for half a second before reaching out to touch it. It was hot. A second spike followed immediately. A bone spike struck a crew member's vest with a deafening impact, pinning him forcefully against the crane base. His toes barely touched the ground as he gripped the spike, trying to pull out, but it wouldn't budge. His gloves slipped, his palms coated in amber mucus. Then, the surface of the spike began to dissolve outward, releasing fine, fibrous barbs, each one writhing. They clamped tightly around the contours of his shoulder, madly wriggling and expanding outward, I watched helplessly as the fabric beneath his tactical vest distorted severely from the internal intrusion. His collar tore open first, followed by his undershirt, the fabric bulging outward into tiny, sharp protrusions. He was still making that sound. The machine gunner scrambled to pull him free, but I grabbed the back of his collar and yanked him back. Over the comm, someone was calling for medic 3 for times with no response. The bridge alarms continued to blare, their high-pitched shrieks slicing all other sounds on the deck into fragments. The creature didn't stop. After firing over a dozen spikes, it kept shooting more. One of the deck lights shattered, glass fragments mixing with amber mucus as they dripped downward. A spike embedded itself into an iron crate 3 meters away, piercing clean through, its tip protruding from the other side. Near the drainage outlet, a soldier crouching to reload was struck diagonally in the calf by a spike. He fell backward, the spike lodged in his leg, its tail scraping across the deck with a grating metallic screech as he tried to move. The bridge intercom crackled again. The captain's voice came through in broken fragments, shouting for all deck personnel to retreat toward the bridge. I looked back at the bridge. A large splash of amber liquid was smeared across the blast-resistant glass, dripping downward. Wherever the liquid flowed, it left corrosive marks, and white spots began to bloom on the glass surface. Figures moved inside the wheelhouse, someone pointing in our direction. Then that grayish-white biological structure began to shrink. After firing about a dozen spikes, the external vesicles all suddenly deflated, like letting the air out of an inflated balloon, their surfaces wrinkling into loose, sagging sacs that swayed between the grayish-white hard plates. The entire mass of tissue collapsed inward, the hard plates peeling off one by one from the surface and falling into the sea, floating on the water like clipped fingernails. There was no wind, so they just drifted there, slowly turning in circles. 20 minutes later, there was nothing left on the sea. Everything grew quiet. Only the ship's alarm, still dully, sounding from some distant compartment. They carried my teammate into the infirmary. The spike was still embedded in his shoulder. As the ship's doctor cut opened his clothes, I stood at the doorway and saw the parasite firmly latched onto his back. The doctor gritted his teeth, using forceps to clean the wound. The tray was filled with nauseating extracted matter. By the end, 37 spikes lay in the tray, each wrapped in a layer of necrotic muscle tissue. The doctor said the spikes were hollow, like dead men's teeth. Her face pale, she said it was some kind of defensive counterattack. We had awakened it. She spent a long time examining it under the microscope. I went to clean the deck. Near the starboard scupper, I crouched down to pick up shell casings and saw a few fleshy nodules growing in the gaps of the scupper grate, pale pink, each with several small branches at the top, stretching toward the seawater like tentacles. I pried one open with a bayonet. Inside were layers of nested tubes. The innermost tube still held amber liquid, identical to what the vesicles had sprayed, the sweet, fishy smell lingering. As I crouched there examining it, the steel plate beneath my feet shuddered, as if something massive had turned over in the depths. I stood up. The searchlight was still on, its beams sweeping out, illuminating the ice 300 yards away. The holes had reappeared. The size and spacing of the holes were as precise as if measured with a ruler, stretching into the darkness. I stared for a few seconds before realizing they formed an arrow, its tip pointing directly at the stern. I was helping inspect welds in the lower compartments when the first impact struck the portside hull. My face was only 30 centimeters from the steel plate when it suddenly bulged inward. Rivets began popping out, one by one, flying off the steel and smashing against the opposite bulkhead. One grazed the edge of my helmet, ricocheting off the ceiling before falling. The bulge continued to grow. The surface of the steel began to take shape. Something with jointed structures was pushing from the outside. Through the steel, I could see its outline becoming clearer, counting at least 3 curved joint segments, ending in a horseshoe-shaped blunt tip. It struck once, paused, then struck again, shifting half an inch to the right. The third impact was heavier than the first two, the steel bulging out further, the paint around the rivet holes flaking off completely. It was searching for the weakest point. Over the intercom, the sonar room began shouting. An echo had emerged from 900 feet below, massive, surging upward. They said something about a ring-shaped body, segmented structure, over 400 meters long, ascending at 18 knots, heading straight for the ship's hull. The captain ordered an emergency evasive maneuver, but before he finished speaking, the thing struck. The impact came from directly beneath the hull. The 12,000-ton ship was lifted entirely. My feet left the ground, and I floated upward for less than a second before crashing back down, my knees slamming into the steel weld seam, my teeth clenching so hard my tongue ached. From the deck above came the sound of containers breaking free from their chains, the iron links snapping one by one, broken chain links flying and striking nearby objects, followed by the roar of containers scraping across the deck, crushing something. The sound was muffled and uneven, like a truck running over two sandbags, then crashing through the starboard railing, tearing off a large section of iron railing as they fell into the sea. I scrambled up to look out the porthole. The scuppers on the aft deck began spewing amber bubbles in reverse, each scupper simultaneously spraying upward, the bubbles filled with fragments of varying shapes, all coated in amber mucus. The fragments began to split as soon as they touched the air, their surfaces sprouting fine radial attachments, desperately burrowing into the gaps in the steel like living things. A damaged control crewman beside me pressed his face against the porthole glass, cursed, then reached out to touch the porthole seal. A layer of grayish-red film had already formed on the seal, beneath which a dense network of tubular structures pulsed, pumping fluid, more than just that was surging up from the ship's hull. Within seconds, the entire aft deck was covered by translucent membrane. The previously clear anti-slip patterns on the deck were now obscured beneath a shifting, flesh-colored film, its surface oozing amber droplets that rolled down the steel slope, merging with the rising bubbles of the drainage holes. I edged toward the hatch, the fabric of my pants rubbing painfully against the swollen bruise on my right knee. As I passed the ladder well, I heard the engine room intercom blaring. The chief engineer was shouting that 3 watertight compartments were flooding simultaneously. He yelled for the damage control team to get down there immediately, his voice punctuated by the dull thuds of wrenches striking pipes. The stairway to the lower decks was blocked by sailors clutching fire extinguishers. Squeezing past, I saw a section of the filter had been removed, its mesh clogged with a fist-sized dark brown mass. The edges of the mass bore gill-like slits, frantically pumping mucus into the pipes. One sailor jabbed at it with a crowbar. When he pulled the tool back, it came away trailing sticky strands. The mass contracted briefly, then pulsed even faster. Beyond the watertight door at the end of the corridor, the deck began to bulge. The once smooth anti-slip patterns arched into mounds, the welds between plates snapping one by one. A crack split the peak of the bulge, oozing a deep amber, steaming liquid. Even through my boots, I could feel its heat as it flowed past my feet, hotter than ice. The sickly sweet stench of decaying protein, carried on the steam, flooded deep into my nostrils. A damaged control crewman stumbled backward, his right boot sinking into the viscous pool. 3 seconds later, he let out a cry. His combat boot instantly softened and crumbled under the corrosion. He screamed, collapsing to the deck, frantically kicking off the disintegrating footwear. Amber droplets began to drip from the ceiling. Warm, sticky fluid splattered onto the back of my hand. The engine room's roar vibrated through the bulkheads, but beneath it was another sound, a deep, oppressive thumping that made my chest tighten. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm quickened, an inhuman tremor traveling through the steel plates, seeping into our very bones. Like the heartbeat of some colossal creature. The sonar officer's voice crackled over the intercom, strained and sharp. He reported that the sonar echoes had split, at least 30 of them, breaking away from the main body and encircling the ship. Pressing against the porthole, I peered out. The dark sea revealed nothing, only the ship's lights casting circles on the water, the edges of which now rippled intensely, densely, like rain. Yet no rain fell from the sky. The engine room intercom continued to blare. The captain had already announced ship-wide 3 times to activate the MW-1 acoustic deterrent system. Originally designed to counter frogmen, the device was mounted on the hull, emitting low-frequency pulses downward. I heard the operator on the bridge calling out parameters, shouting about full power emission. Then, the entire ship's steel plates began to hum. The high-frequency, deathly drone instantly pierced through everyone's skulls and the bulkheads. Everyone on deck scrambled for something to hold on to. One sailor dropped to his knees, bracing himself with both hands on the deck, fingers splayed, palms pressed against the vibrating steel. The sea erupted. A 50-yard radius of water behind the stern exploded into a churning mass of white foam. Ice shards and amber bodily fluids, churned by the shockwave, mixed into a dirty, yellowish-white emulsion, surging at least 10 meters into the air. The searchlights swept over the area, but all that was visible was a roiling chaos of foam and suspended debris. Then, the separated sonar echoes began charging toward the surface. The sonar officer shouted over the intercom. Over 30 independent echoes were accelerating upward simultaneously, their speed nearly doubling, no longer circling the ship, but heading straight for the surface. Pressed against the porthole, I saw the first one break the surface. It leaped from the bow direction, over 7 meters long, its body segmented with bony plates. Between the segments, clusters of flagella-like appendages twitched wildly in the air. Its tail was a distended sac, ejecting a transparent fluid that propelled its entire body horizontally over the bow. As it passed overhead, it released a rain of mucus. A downpour of corrosive fluid slammed onto the deck, splattering across the faceplate of a sailor who had looked up. The soldier screamed, clutching his visor as corrosive white smoke instantly engulfed his helmet. Wherever the mucus landed, the steel plates sizzled, the sound of corrosion spreading like wildfire. A second creature burst from the water 30 yards off the starboard side. A third followed close behind, leaping at a steeper angle, almost vertical, its tail sack blasting a jet that cratered the sea's surface. Someone was firing on the deck. The machine gunner swung his ammunition belt, holding down the trigger as he tracked the first leaping creature. The tracer rounds arced through the air, but couldn't keep up with its speed, all the bullets hitting the sea and sending up bright white plumes of water under the searchlights. The rifleman was taking aimed shots at the second creature, firing in controlled bursts of 3 rounds each, spent casings scattering chaotically across the deck. I reached out and caught a droplet of liquid drifting down from above. It landed in my palm, and the fabric of my glove immediately began to change color. Then I felt heat, scalding heat. Even through the tactical glove, it felt like someone had dripped freshly heated oil into my hand. I tore off the glove and flung it to the deck. The skin on my palm was already red and blistering. In the minus 40 degrees Celsius Arctic, the monster's mucus that had splashed into my hand was actually steaming. I looked up at the creatures still arcing through the air and suddenly realized they were chasing the sonar pulses. The sonar beneath the ship was a live target. Turn off the sonar, I shouted into the comms, my voice cracking. I couldn't make out the response over the blaring alarms on the bridge. I yelled again, shut it down. They're homing in on the sound source. Go fully silent. The captain gave the order over the broadcast to cut the sonar. The comms erupted with noise for a second. Then the sonar equipment went dead. The ship's hum ceased abruptly. The vibration underfoot stopped, and the pressure in my ears eased. The sudden silence was so stark that everyone on deck froze mid-action for a split second. The machine gunner, still holding the trigger, fired the last 3 rounds from his barrel before his finger finally relaxed. Spent casings clattered into the drain grates. The small sonar echoes on the sea surface vanished the moment the sonar stopped, leaving the screen empty except for open water. Even the massive echo was gone. The silence lasted about 12 seconds. The third leaping creature slammed into the port side of the bridge. Its body exploded against the blast-proof glass, 15 segmented joints firing calcified shrapnel in all directions like grenade fragments. The sound of shrapnel piercing the bridge's steel plates was like hail hitting a tin roof, but 10 times denser. One piece spun into the bridge, embedding itself in the navigation console and splintering the wooden surface into jagged fragments. The navigator screamed, clutching his neck as he toppled from his chair, dark red blood gushing uncontrollably between his fingers. I applied a tourniquet to his shoulder. Through my glove, I could feel something beneath the skin above his collarbone pulsing at a frenzied rate. The captain gave the order for free fire. The heavy machine guns on deck roared to life, their continuous fire shaking the deck. A soldier carrying an ammo box ran past me, slipped on the mucus, and dropped the box, scattering bullets everywhere. Someone bent to pick them up, their fingers brushing against another's as they knelt in the mucus, their gloves coated in an amber film. I dragged 2 ammo boxes toward the stern deck. The scene there made me pause mid-step. The mycelium-like biofilm crawling out of the drains had already climbed onto the aft superstructure, layering it at least 3 levels deep. The biofilm on the deck was growing upward into cylindrical fruiting bodies, fleshy towers clustering together, their tops splitting open like petals to release a haze of pale amber spores. The spore cloud dispersed like smoke in the sea breeze, and wherever it touched the steel surfaces, new biofilm began to form. Someone pulled the pin from a white phosphorus grenade and shoved it directly into the opening of the nearest stupa. The grenade detonated with a muffled blast that shook the deck, tearing the structure apart from within and scattering burning fragments. The flames were a deep green. The green fire spread to the surrounding biofilm, emitting a stench so pungent it penetrated our gas masks, an indescribable foulness that instantly seeped through the filters. Several people near me dropped to their knees, retching violently. One tore off his mask and vomited directly onto the deck. The fire burned for over half a minute. Then the seafloor rumbled again. The ice began to bulge upward from below, the swelling so vast that none of the ship's searchlights could reach its edges. The entire horizon was rising. The ship, supported by the ice, was tilted to a 35-degree angle and began sliding down the curved bulge. All the leaping creatures simultaneously ceased moving and sank into the water. The sea surface suddenly went still, flat, and smooth as oil. The only remaining echo on the sonar display surged upward directly beneath us at 30 knots, its whiteness so intense it maxed out the screen's range. I stood on the stern deck, bracing myself in the corner between the railing and the bulkhead, fastening a belt around my waist and securing it to a railing post. I tilted my head upward. The outline of the ship's hull under the moonlight was reflected on the water surface. Beneath the shimmering reflection, the edge of a pale object, 5 times larger than the ship, emerged from the dark depths, rising layer by layer. Then it brushed against the starboard side of the ship. All the portholes shattered. I heard the sound of glass breaking, traveling from the bow to the stern in a wave. Through the blown-out window frames, I saw it. An endless plain of keratin. Layers of grayish-white plates stretched as far as the moonlight could reach, densely covered with thousands of fist-sized sacs, pulsating rhythmically. Between the sacs, a network of tubular structures carried amber fluid flowing rapidly, the liquid surface visibly surging within the pipes. The surface of the plane had gentle undulations, and a wave of foul, scorching heat hit me, nearly suffocating. This thing wasn't hiding beneath the ice. It was the ice itself. All this time, we thought we were breaking through ice, but we had been plowing through the flesh of a colossal beast. I fired the grenade launcher mounted under my M4, aiming at the densest cluster of sacs about 10 yards off the starboard side. The recoil of the 40mm grenade slammed into my shoulder. The projectile burrowed into one of the sacs and detonated inside. A 2-yard wide gap tore open in the tissue, revealing 3 layers of crisscrossing fibrous muscles beneath. Every severed fiber twitched independently, jerking in different directions. I fired a second grenade into the same wound, deeper this time. A jet of amber fluid erupted from the center of the wound with such force that it produced a low, roaring sound. The liquid struck an 800-pound winch on the deck, lifting it off the ground and slamming it into the stern superstructure. The impact sounded heavy and dull, like a blunt object smashing in a frozen meat. As the stern slid off the edge of the keratin plane, the entire ship dropped, its hull slamming against the water. The steel plates groaned as if about to split. Strapped to the railing post by the belt, the impact drove the buckle deep into the flesh of my waist, forcing the air from my lungs. My vision went black for a second. Over the bridge broadcast, the captain was shouting orders to the engine room and anyone still able to move, urging them to restore power. His voice was repeatedly cut off by the distorted sounds echoing through the ship's hull, each time dissolving in a static mid-sentence. I fumbled with the belt buckle, but my fingers slipped. The buckle was jammed. I tugged 3 times without success. On the 4th try, I pulled with all my strength, and the buckle snapped free, flying off and hitting the metal wall. Even through my clothes, I could feel a deep indentation where the belt had dug into my waist. 300 yards off the stern, it rose from the ice. Amber fluid gushed from the breach in the ice first. The warm liquid vaporized instantly in the sub-zero air, forming billowing clouds of steam. Then, from the center of the white mist, something emerged. Its surface was covered in overlapping bony plates, grayish-white and layered, each plate's edge lined with rows of sacs of varying sizes, some just beginning to swell, others already pulsating and spraying fluid. It rose higher and higher, filling the horizon, blocking half the sky. Moonlight seeped from behind it, outlining its silhouette with a white-hot edge, revealing every detail of its surface: bony plates, sacs, pulsations, and waves of heat. It was just one thick tentacle. The tip of the appendage began to unfurl toward the stern. Its end resembled a massive flower of minced meat bursting open from the center. From within, countless needle-like teeth emerged, each as long as a person, calcium white and pointed, each rotating independently. As the needle-like teeth spun, they grated against one another, emitting a high-pitched, continuous screech, like thousands of knives being sharpened on whetstones at once. The bridge broadcasted the order to open fire. Every weapon still operational on the deck roared to life simultaneously. A heavy machine gun, mounted on the stern superstructure, swept its fire toward the gaping maw. Tracer rounds cut orange streaks through the night sky, chipping small fragments off the bony plates upon impact. The bullets couldn't penetrate deeper, only carving shallow pits into the surface. The bipod beneath the barrel jerked with each shot, vibrating the steel deck plates. The gunner leaned over the bipod, the veins on his neck bulging. I could see him cursing clearly, but the gunfire drowned out every word. I grabbed the rifle and fired at the center of that gaping maw, squeezing off shots one by one, aiming for the roots of those rotating needle-like teeth. A bullet struck one of the teeth, causing it to wobble and veer off its path, colliding with another tooth. The 2 teeth ground together with a screech of metal, sending pale calcium fragments flying from the impact. But the deflected tooth didn't fall. It readjusted its angle in its socket and resumed spinning, faster than before. Someone near the bow shouted for the cannon. The 38 Malawian Quach's naval gun turret whined as its hydraulic pumps turned, the barrel lowering to aim at the thing beyond the stern. The first shell fired, the muzzle blast ripping a white ring through the air as the round struck a particularly large bone plate on the appendage's midsection. The explosion flashed for half a second, black smoke billowing outward. The bone plate was cratered, its edges curling outward as amber liquid seeped from within, vaporizing in a mist upon contact with the air. But the plate didn't shatter. The entire appendage didn't even flinch. The second shell struck beside the first crater. The hole widened, the bridge of bone between the 2 impacts cracking apart. A fragment the size of a car broke off, spinning into the sea and sending up a wall of water several stories high. When it crashed back down, the waves surged onto the deck, carrying amber slime that hissed and smoked as it corroded the steel. The deck's anti-slip grooves dissolved under the liquid, the metal surface bubbling with black-gray rust. Then the appendage moved. It continued extending from the breach in the ice, slow but unstoppable, too massive to evade. With every inch it advanced, another slice of the sky above the stern vanished. The gaping maw at its tip descended as it pushed forward, looming from 300 yards out over the water toward the ship. The turret kept firing, shells hammering the same spot. The third round blasted through the weakened bone plate, the armor-piercing round detonating inside, tearing open the underlying structure and sending up a cloud of pale dust. Finally, a hole was punched through, its edges crumbling to reveal a dark red inner layer, writhing unnaturally. Someone on deck rushed forward with a rocket launcher, kneeling on one knee behind me. He shouted before firing. The rocket streaked out, trailing white smoke, and plunged into the hole the naval gun had just made. A flash of light preceded the explosion by half a second, a muffled subterranean boom. The hole was blown open from within, a massive dark mass hurled out and crashing onto the ice, leaving a grotesque trail. But the appendage didn't stop. The maw loomed directly over the stern. The spinning teeth were now less than 50 meters above me. Their shrieking rotation drowned out all gunfire on deck, the noise pressing against my eardrums. The wind shear from their motion forced everything unsecured backward. Spent casings, ammo box lids, a glove, a helmet, all sliding across the deck before tumbling into the sea. A spotlight beam swept upward, illuminating the rotating teeth. I could see the grooves on their surfaces, each lined with spiraling channels filled with amber crystals that refracted oily light as they spun. At the base of the grooves were microscopic barbs, all pointing inward toward the direction of rotation. The turret fired again. The shell struck the dense cluster of teeth at the maw's center. In the half-second after the explosion, I heard it, a sound that resonated in my chest, vibrating my ribs. The maw descended. The tips of the teeth scraped the edge of the stern deck. The steel screamed as it tore like paper, the jagged edges of the rupture lined with serrated marks. Every light on deck went dark in that instant, leaving only the emergency spotlight on backup power. Red emergency lights flickered on, casting everyone's faces in a bloody hue. The bridge comms erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped, at least 5 shouting at once. The turret's hydraulics still whirred, but the barrel couldn't elevate enough under the maw's shadow. It could no longer fire. I retreated toward the stern deck. The moment my left foot stepped onto the cabin threshold, the mouth parts suddenly accelerated their downward press, their needle-like teeth scraping across the aft deck. The deck surface was peeled away in sheets, the anti-slip grooves torn off along with the steel plates, which shattered at the welds and embedded themselves into the stern wall. One plate flew past and lodged into the bulkhead just 10 centimeters from my face, its edge still trembling with a low hum. The rocket launcher operator reloaded, this time standing to aim instead of kneeling. The rocket shot out, trailing a white arc of smoke as the warhead plunged into the cluster of needle-like teeth crushing the deck. The explosion flipped several teeth, disrupting their gear-like arrangement. 3 or 4 teeth twisted outward as if dislocated, exposing their joint sockets, where cartilage writhed violently like a meat grinder. The wounded creature shuddered unnaturally before abruptly rearing its body higher. The entire mouthparts lifted about 5 meters, instantly clearing a space on the deck. I seized the moment to reload. My finger hit the magazine release, and before the empty one hit the deck, the fresh magazine was already in place. As I shouldered the rifle again, my right hand trembled uncontrollably from upper arm to fingertips, making the sightline waver in circles across the night sky. Instead of pressing down again, the raised mouth parts began unfurling outward from the center. The needle teeth spread from a circular formation into a flat plane, their tips simultaneously turning outward to face those on the aft deck. The rotating tips vibrated in the air as amber droplets gathered between gaps, swelling until they were violently flung onto the deck, sending up plumes of corrosive white smoke. The turret adjusted its elevation and resumed rapid fire. 3 consecutive shells landed squarely in the densest part of the tooth cluster. Flashes of explosions lit the night sky orange-yellow before darkness swallowed it again. The barrage shattered a section of calcified teeth at the center, and from the ruptured tissue, a high-pressure jet of fluid erupted, stronger and faster than any before, piercing through 2 layers of the stern bulkhead and exiting the opposite side of the ship. The jet lasted about 2 seconds before stopping. Within the blasted gap of the tooth cluster, a gleaming white ring-like structure emerged, smooth, reflective, denser than bone, bulging outward from within. My magazine ran dry. The trigger clicked empty. The machine gunner's barrel smoked as he fumbled with the ammo belt, cursing as his fingers jammed between the links, yanking at the tangled mess. The turret's hydraulic pump paused briefly before whirring back to life, its barrel adjusting position. A swelling began at the appendage's base, rolling upward along its surface toward the gap I'd blasted open. The bony plates along its path strained outward under the pressure, amber fluid seeping from the widening cracks. When the swelling reached the gap, the entire ring-like structure forced its way out. It was a perfect sphere, smooth and at least 4 meters in diameter, emitting a grinding, bone-on-bone creak as it emerged from the tooth cluster. Once fully extruded, it paused, then cracked open from the top, splitting into segments, each edged with calcified spikes identical to the needle-like teeth. Then it exploded. The sphere burst outward, spraying calcified shards and mucus in all directions. The shockwave flattened everything still standing on the bridge, tearing the searchlight mount from its base and sending it tumbling into the sea. The blast hurled me 2 meters backward, my spine cracking against the stern corner as the back of my skull hit steel. My left ear rang, deafened by a high-pitched whine. I staggered up to survey the deck. The rocket launcher operator lay beside where he'd knelt, the launcher flung meters away. The anti-slip grooves were drowned in the ejected mucus, seeping into every crevice. Emergency red lights still glowed, illuminating bodies strewn across the deck, alive or dead. No one could tell. But the appendage began to retract. After expelling the sphere, the needle-like teeth slowed their rotation, folding back into their joint sockets layer by layer. The deadly gear-like flower closed in on itself, retreating into the frigid depths. The appendage withdrew from above the stern, sinking back along its original path into the ice breach. No one fired on the deck. The turret ceased its rotation. Everyone lay still, watching it descend. As the appendage's final segment retracted into the breach in the ice, the water's surface momentarily sealed shut, sending out a circular ripple that expanded outward in all directions. Then the sea smoothed over, and the shattered ice around the breach drifted back toward the center, colliding and freezing together, forming a fresh expanse of white ice. At that moment, the backup power in the engine room roared back to life. The vibrations of the spinning propeller reverberated through the hull as the ship began to inch forward. The ice reformed at an alarming speed. Within 15 seconds, the once chaotic waters behind the stern were covered by a grayish-white film of ice, and in another 15, it had transformed into a desolate white plain indistinguishable from surroundings. I pushed myself up from the corner, my knees buckling momentarily before I steadied myself. My helmet had tilted to one side, so I yanked it off and tossed it aside. My ears still rang, but I could faintly make out the captain's voice over the bridge's intercom, calling for all personnel to report to the medical officer for a head count. The ship continued forward. The searchlight swept over the ice behind the stern. The ice was deathly white, pristine, as if the living hell of the past few hours had never existed. The holes were gone, the pulsating sacs were gone, the appendage that had blotted out half the sky had vanished without a trace, as though none of it had ever happened. I slumped against the bulkhead of the stern deck, resting my rifle across my knees. The barrel was cold, the grip coated in an amber-colored film. I rubbed it with my thumb, and flakes of keratin crumbled away. My left ear was beginning to pick up sound again. The roar of the engine, my own ragged breathing, and the shuffling footsteps of those around me all flooded in at once. The emergency red lights overhead cast fragmented pools of illumination across the deck. At the edges of the light, Amber liquid still dripped slowly from the torn steel plating, leaking through the gaps and splattering onto the walkway of the lower deck. Drip, drip. The ship pressed on southward. A medic pulled me into the infirmary to treat the graze on my right shoulder. He cut my sleeve open from shoulder to wrist with scissors, revealing a wound that had already stopped bleeding. The edges of the injury were tightly sealed, covered by a thin, glossy film with an unsettling, viscous translucence. Wade dabbed at it with a disinfectant swab. I asked if he planned to remove the film. He hesitated. Using tweezers, he lifted a corner of the film. It peeled away on its own, curling into a brittle flake on the stainless steel tray, grayish white, much like the ones we'd seen on deck earlier. He tore open a fresh swab and continued examining my shoulder. I glanced down at the tray. The fragment lay near the edge, illuminated by moonlight streaming through the porthole. A bright line cut across the tray's surface, intersecting the flake. I stared for about 3 seconds. It was unfurling. Slowly, so slowly you wouldn't notice unless you were watching, but it was expanding. Its edges stretched outward, its surface area slightly larger than before. I called out. The medic turned to look where I was pointing. He studied the tray for a long moment before lifting it into the light. The fragment stopped moving. He prodded it with the tweezers, just a lifeless, hardened piece of dead skin. Dismissing it with a muttered remark, he pushed the tray aside. Outside the porthole, the sea behind the stern showed no trace of what had happened. The shattered ice along the ship's path had refrozen into a solid sheet, sealing completely in under 15 minutes. The surface was as flat as a table, offering no evidence of the horrors of the past few hours. The medic found another small patch below my wound, about the size of a fingernail. He shone a flashlight directly against it. The spiral pattern reflected light differently, glossy and slick. He asked if it hurt. I said no. He covered it with a bandage. I pulled my clothes back on and stood. My knees still trembled, and the ringing in my left ear persisted. The bridge intercom recited the casualty list, the sound muffled by the closed door. I pushed it open and stepped out. The emergency red lights still bathed the deck, their glow catching the jagged edges of the torn steel plating. From the gaps, amber liquid continued to drip onto the metal walkway below. Drip, drip.